Historical Museum. My name is Andy Thomas. I'm the curator here.
Okay.
And if you haven't seen our museum, we invite y'all to come and see our museum. We're open Tuesday through Friday from 9 to 4 and on Saturdays and Sundays from 2 to 5. And the price is $3 for adults, $2 for seniors, $2 for military ID, $1 for children under 12, toddlers get in free. And we've got 4 great rooms telling the history of this Casey area going back all the way to Native American times. We've got the forts we talk about, the colonial forts, we talk about the antebellum period, we talk about the Civil War, and then we talk about the 20th century and the things that happened in this community in the 20th century. So I would love to have you visit us. We also have a park here in Casey called the 12,000 Year History Park. The 12,000 Year History Park is, if you haven't been to it, there's tours that we do at the park. We do a colonial forts tour, we do a Civil War tour. We've got a bird walk that we're going to do this year, and we also do Native American lifestyles tour. And so we would love to have you come out to those tours. I've got some information on the table out there to tell you a little bit about that. We try to do something like this every month. And next month of March the 16th at 6 o'clock, we've got Charles Baxley, who is the state chairman for the American Revolution Centennial Commission. And he's coming to talk about General Sumter and his rounds campaign, including his battle at Fort Granby in February 1781. So we'd love to have you back. If you're interested in Revolutionary War history, then come back and check that out. Now, I'm going to introduce our speaker. So Mr. George Wingard, he joined the Savannah River Archaeological Research Program staff in 1993 with a BA Humanities from the University of South Carolina. He is now the program coordinator and oversees the budgets, personnel, and daily administration of that program. The Savannah River Archaeological Research Program is a division of the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology, which is a department of the University of South Carolina. It's located on the Savannah River site and is a Department of Energy facility straddling Aiken, Barnwell, and Allendale counties. Georgia's area of interest is the historic towns and remnant cemeteries located on the SRS site, 18th and 19th century stoneware of the central Savannah River area, and the mill village of Graniteville, founded by the textile giant William Gregg. George is also the co-producer of the documentary Discovering Dave, Spirit Captured in Clay, detailing the life and times of the enslaved Edgefield, South Carolina potter David Drake. The film has been screened throughout the United States and is being used as a teaching aid at several universities. And when I called Mr. Wingard, he said he had not done this in a while. He says, I think this is the first presentation he's done since January 2020. So we're real excited to have him here at the Casey Historical Museum. And I'm going to turn it over to him now.
Sounds great. Thank you for having me. As he said, this is kind of the first presentation I've given since January of 20, so I'm a little rusty. I got my sea legs. I have not spoken on Dave in probably 4 or 5 years. Since Discovering Dave, Spirit Captured in Clay, I've done like 9 more films. So this basis of all this research kind of runs around in my head. So if I look like a deer caught in headlights up here during this presentation, remember why. And finally, I just wanted to say that since I have you all here, I do want to discuss your car insurance also. Here, we'll just talk about that a little later. So yeah, I'll flip it in just a second. So most of what he just said on the little introduction, I'm going to repeat again real quick. I work for the Savannah River Archaeological Research Program. We're a division of the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology, which is a department of the University of South Carolina. We are located on the Savannah River site. Savannah River site is 300 square miles. straddling Aiken, Barnwell, and Allendale counties. If you're not familiar with the Savannah River site, it's about 65 miles southwest of here. It is a nuclear facility. Locally, we all called it, as I was growing up, the bum plant. Never built a bomb there, so if you believe that, that never happened. We did build the components for the hydrogen bomb, which was built elsewhere. Tritium and plutonium was primarily what came out of the Savannah River site. Its mission today, most of its missions are cleanup missions and green energy, things like that is what's going on site now. But it straddles Aiken, Barnwell, and Allendale counties. It's a huge facility. We are a direct contractor. The SRRP is a direct contractor with the Department of Energy. There's only 8 of us. Some of the other contractors have literally thousands down there. There's only 8 of us in our office, and we have a threefold mission for the Department of Energy. Number 1 is compliance. Our job is to ensure the management and protection of the cultural resources. Nearly 13,000 years of history on site. Paleo people, archaic, the woodland, the Mississippian. You get into the colonial period, antebellum, postbellum, late 19th, early 20th, all the way up to the displacement of the former communities and towns in 1950. The announcement was made November 28th, 1950. Savannah River's Project is what it was known at its time when it came in. Displaced about 6,000 people in the area. The towns of Ellington, Dunbarton, Myers Mill, other little small communities in the footprint, Hawthorne, Denora, Lee, Sleepy Hollow, Greenland. So a large chunk of area. And I could go on for hours to talk about this. That's another one of my presentations. But just kind of give you a context of where we're at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through, and I'm going to be honest, I went through this PowerPoint recently. I made it 4 or 5 years ago. So again, if I start looking like a deer in headlights, I'm looking at this probably for the first time like y'all in some places going, okay, what am I supposed to say here? I think it'll come back. I love talking about Dave. Dave is an inspiration. You know, he's got such an inspiring story. So I really do love talking about Dave. I do know that during these presentations, you know, I'll be talking about Dave. I'll be giving a lot of highlights about Dave, his life, what we know about it. You know, just a disclaimer early on. And there's going to be audio representation of this. There's going to be you're going to hear me. There's going to be visual, obviously. Dave was an enslaved individual. So if that doesn't come through, and I start getting a little flowery up here about Dave's life, you know, it's because I'm really I love telling his story, and I try to tell it the best I can from his viewpoint. But it does not. You can't go without saying. Always remember, Dave. He was an enslaved individual. So keep that in the back of your mind here. But I'm going to start off, and we're going to work our way all the way through. And I got a little something under. If you can't tell, probably what's under is blue cloth. You know, there is something under blue cloth, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we're going to get started here. And again, Savannah River Archaeology. What are we doing? The arrow, right? There's an arrow somewhere. That's not it. Space bar, I did that. That's not doing anything. That's not doing anything.
Technology is always
Sure. Which one? Oh, that one. All righty. Look at that. See, I told you.
Well, we brought the young kids.
If you don't know what this is, obviously this is South Carolina. Edgefield District of South Carolina was really the cultural heart of the Alpine Glaze stoneware tradition. Right there we got Aiken, Edgefield, that area highlighted there. Savannah Riverside actually is this area pretty much right here. Is the Savannah Riverside. If you ever watch your news at night, we're the big green spot down there in Georgia. You know, when they show the Doppler, that big green glow. That's the Savannah Riverside. That's us. Dr. Abner Landrum discovered high-quality clay in 1809. Dr. Abner Landrum was, he was kind of known as the Benjamin Franklin at his time. I mean, he was dabbling in everything. You know, he was splicing pecan trees together and making a whole new species of pecan. And he found this clay, which this pure clay. It was pretty clean. And what I mean by that is, you go dig your clay. You've got to do a lot to it to get it to a point where you can work it. He actually found a vein of clay in Edgefield that was relatively pure to begin with. They could dig this and almost begin the process of manufacturing the pottery with having to go through that extra process of getting the clay ready. So really he found this, again in Edgefield. We would think of thinking of Dr. Landrum kind of in today's terms, loosely. He was a little more liberal-minded. He had a newspaper in Edgefield called The Hive. He was a proponent of some ideas that after a time period the people of Edgefield didn't agree with. So Mr. Landrum had to leave Edgefield, and he came up here to Columbia. And actually we have on the other side of Columbia the Stork factory, manufacturing, which eventually kind of is genealogically connected to a lot of the Pottersville after many generations. So this is Admiral Landrum. No photo. This is all we have of Mr. Landrum here. Is his cutout here. Again, as I was jumping ahead, look at that. There's a photo of the Hive newspaper. There's only one complete copy that we know of the Hive. And Edgefield. So here's a Edgefield map from the Mills Atlas, and you can see we've got Edgefield and Landrumsville, or as most people call it, and we call it Pottersville, is what most of us call it in the local area. Landrumsville. Mr. Landrum created Pottersville with his nephew Harvey Drake. Harvey Drake is the gentleman who really ran ran Pottersville as a successful pottery plantation. Mr. Landrum himself did not have any slaves, and we're going to come back to that in just a moment. Some of the other potteries in the area spread out all around Edgefield here. So we've got 10 of them here. Pottersville, Reverend John Landrum, the Miles, the Phoenix Factory, the Rhodes Factory, Chandler. A lot of these are big names, that, especially if you do any history or go over and visit, for example, the McKissick Museum. A lot of these names you're going to see in some of their collections. The State Museum, as well as the Charleston Museum, have a lot of great examples of Rhodes and Landrum, Chandler, and whatnot. So, a lot of times when you start talking about an individual like Dave in Pottersville, a lot of people go, wow, he's making all this pottery. You kind of forget that, at Pottersville, he was just one of several potters that they have. And then you have 10, that these 10 were really pretty much simultaneously running. So, at any given time, you didn't just have Dave making pottery. You had 30 or 40 potters at any given time making pottery. So the pottery was coming out of this area by thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands on a monthly basis. And we'll discuss that in a little bit as to why they needed so much of this pottery. This picture today up here of Pottersville at the top. The head of the kiln is up here. Actually, the chimney portion of the kiln would be up in these trees. It stretches down to almost the line where you see the shadow of the trees there. Pottersville had been known for a long time that's where the kiln was located. And you see here a little diorama that they had of the kiln, and here's a representation of what it looked like, what they thought it looked like. They had the kiln here, and for the longest time, they thought it was basically like a groundhog kiln. 30 feet long, made a lot of pottery, came out of it. It wasn't until 2012 when the University of Illinois came down and did an extensive archaeological excavation of Pottersville, found out it was not 30 feet long, it was 105 feet long. It was a massive kiln. Kilns like this are seen, they're called dragon kilns in China. But here they were not expecting this to be this big, and it turns out once they went also and excavated on Mr. Miles' property, once Pottersville collapsed and he had to move it to his other piece of property, that kiln also was 105 feet long. So now what you got, you have this story that's been building for so long of Dave, and again all the other potters, but Dave, so much potter's coming. Now you're kind of going, wait a minute, it's 3 times the size that we thought it was. The volume that is coming out of this kiln is even so much more than we ever thought before. at 105 feet. And they could do so much more now with this 105 feet. They're baking the stoneware up front. They're making these stoneware jars and jugs and plates and cups and everything that's needed. But at the far end of it, they can actually bisque fire things because it's not getting as hot in the fire. So they're making finer products, nicer, higher quality type of products, stuff that the ladies don't mind showing in their cases in their front rooms, not the stuff that's being used to churn the butter and down in the kitchens to store food, store grain, things like that. So yes, a much larger kiln they were not expecting until they began to excavate it. Just a little bit here, let's talk a little bit about the history of Dave here. 1818, Harvey Drake, who owned Pottersville with his uncle Dr. Admiral Landrum, purchases Dave. Reuben Drake and Jasper Gibbs purchases Drake's estate after he dies. Dave was included in that estate, and it's believed that Dave began writing on pots about this time. It was around the 1830s that Dave began writing on the pots. In a few minutes, I'm going to tell you the first inscription that we know of one of Dave's. Between 1843 and 1849, Dave does not, there's no evidence of Dave writing on any jars during this time period. We do know that during this time period he was owned by Benjamin Franklin Landrum, Reverend John Landrum and Benjamin Franklin Landrum, Reverend John's son. They were Abner's brother and nephew. As we said earlier, Abner was a little more liberal-minded. Today you'd kind of think of Reverend John, a little more conservative-minded. So was there a reason? Well, Dave was not supposed to know how to read and write. After the 1830s, it was against the law to teach slaves how to read and write. Dave should not have been known how to read or write. By 1843, this time period where he's no longer, we speculate he's no longer reading or writing on his jars, Dave had already been still writing on jars for 5, 6, 7, 8 years at that point in time. And we believe the reason, how he learned to read and write was, we know in 1809, Abner visited a potter in Philadelphia, Reverend Vickers, Robert Vickers, if I remember correctly. And while he was up there, he noticed that all the children were being taught to read and write, including the African American children being to read and write. And Abner mentions to Vickers, he says, why? And he said, they need to learn how to read and write, and they need to know how to read the Bible. So we believe it's at this time that Abner comes back and says to Harvey does own slaves, obviously. He's got the pottery plantation. Abner comes back with this idea, and at which point we believe Dave and some of the other African Americans there were being taught to read and write there on Pottersville. A lot of people also say that with Abner having the newspaper, there's a story that Dave may have worked at the newspaper and actually helped set the type, that Abner taught him to do that. And you do so see in some of the verses that Dave puts on his jars, there are some words that are a little above my educational frame of reference. So it's kind of interesting where he found some of these words. But again, so that's how we believe Dave come to know how to read and write. 1847, Dave is now in the estate of Reverend John Landrum. When Landrum died, his son Franklin Landrum purchases Dave. In 1849, that will is contested by his sister Mary, who was married to Lewis Miles. Now, Lewis Miles is going to become a name that I'll be mentioning off and on pretty much the rest of this time. Lewis Miles, due to the fact that Mary contests the will and everything came to her husband, at this point, owns pretty much her estate. And therefore, Lewis Miles owns Dave at this point. Now, Dave had either been borrowed or rented by Lewis, at least since the 1830s, because in a lot of his early jars, Dave would put the initials LM on the jar, which stood for Lewis Miles. So we know that these two had a long working relationship well beyond him being owned in 1849 by Lewis. And of course, 1865, Dave is free. Here's a few documents here. We know this is a deed where I mentioned earlier that Harvey Drake had purchased Dave. He uses Dave as collateral when trying to get some money towards Pottersville. And in the collateral, he says that Dave is about 17 years old. The deed is from 1818, therefore do the math, about 1801. And we do know that Dave was country born here, probably in South Carolina. Maybe Georgia, but probably South Carolina. Just a few more deeds. You see Dave's name in certain places here. How much he's worth on certain inventories, $400, $200. Dave is mentioned again over here in more paperwork. For better examples, or for more history, for more information about some of this here, a great book to read is Carolina Clay by Leonard Todd. It's a great book. He goes into depth about a lot of these documents himself. You can read that. He does a great job of kind of weaving fiction and nonfiction in Carolina Clay. So you have to kind of read, when he talks about Abner Landrum standing at Pottersville swinging his cane. Okay, maybe he did, but it makes for great reading. So you have to kind of go in between. But great book. Leonard's a great guy, and Carolina Clay is a great book. Just another document here. And we do know that in the 1870 census, if I remember correctly, the 1870 census, Dave is mentioned in the 1870 census at this point being about 70 years old. He is living at this time with Mark and Caroline Jones. So here's where I'm going to kind of get on my soapbox here for just a moment about this. One of the questions that would come up, and it's probably going to be a question I bet one of you was going to ask when I got done, so I'm going to beat you to it, is do we know if Dave has any descendants? Well, what we do know is that in 1870 census, Dave is living with Mark and Caroline Jones. I think if you ask any of us who've done research on this, and any of the folks who've done far more research than I have, we all pretty much agree that Caroline is Dave's daughter. Okay. We do know that in the 1830s, the Landrums did split a big portion of a lot of their holdings, including the slaves that they had, sent a lot of them to Louisiana. And there is some speculative evidence that maybe Dave may have been separated from that family. And again, this is all speculation. But most of us do believe that Caroline was Dave's daughter. Now here's where we walk that fine line. If any of you are here genealogists, any of you do genealogy work? Just a few folks maybe, okay. Without that absolute connection, you have to kind of stop. So if you go online and look up, does Dave have any relatives? A lot of newspaper articles will come up. Because I had a friend of mine contact me, and she goes, "We found Dave's relatives." And I said, "Wow, that's amazing." So as she proceeded to tell me on the phone what was going on, she actually found relatives of Mark and Caroline Jones. Brought all these folks down to Edgefield. And then I told her, I said, genealogically, you're on shaky ground here. I mean, they're definitely a family unit, living here as a family unit. But genealogically, we've got a disconnect here. And sure enough, so when you go online and look at, you'll find that Dave's relatives, again, most of us do believe Caroline is his daughter, but that genealogical connection. But the familial connection is definitely there. And so it just kind of depends on how you want to look at that. They definitely they had a household together there. Actually, I believe Mark and Caroline had some of their children living there also with them. It's believed maybe at this point Dave was infirmed. Edgefield Advertiser mentions Dave in the newspaper. This is 1863. I want to see what the other one was. Here, 1873. At this point, they mentioned another potter in the area named Alfred has died. And now that just leaves the one-legged veteran Dave Drake is left alone. So it may be in 1870 Dave was somewhat infirm. How did Dave become infirm? That we don't know either. There's some speculation that he had his leg cut off in a railroad accident. There's been some debate about whether that actually happened or not. Most people believe it may have just been an accident on working in the pottery. Some of the rusty tools or something, maybe caused an infection or something. We'll never know. We do know, though, in 1873 he was one-legged. When did that happen? We don't really know exactly when that happened. Did it happen early in his life? Did it happen later in his life? We also see here that he's going by the name of Drake. So why is he going by the name of Drake? Well, he took the name Drake. Why didn't he take Lewis Miles, the man he'd been really connected with for so long? Not really sure, but again, one of the theories is, as I said earlier, a lot of his family, or the Landrums, had split a lot of their property, including the slaves, sent them to Louisiana. So the idea being, if some of that family did come back and were looking for a Dave who would have had the last name Drake, they may have been able to put together that Dave belonged to Harvey Drake. That's the family that sent them away. That's an idea. Is that correct? We'll never know. You would think he would have taken the name Miles, having been so closely associated with Lewis for so long, but he took the name, the last name of Drake. This is from the Ceramics in America 2006, just kind of shows you. In 2006, there were 169 vessels signed or attributed to Dave. 43 were inscribed with a poem, inscription, or dedication. This does not include this jar. I got an email yesterday from a gentleman who says he wanted me to look at a piece of pottery that he had. In theory, I was off most of the day. I kind of took the day off knowing I was coming up here. Working from home tomorrow. I was not going to look at the email. I decided to look at the email, and he had a Dave jar that he had recently just found in a barn. So I immediately called him back and I said, you do have a Dave jar. That being said, there has been a few that's found and has come up, but you'll notice right here, this great big silent period, nothing is attributed to Dave during that time frame. Because of Reverend John and Benjamin. Were they strict? Did they say, wait a minute, we can get in trouble if you're writing on these jars, you're not supposed to know how to read and write. Can we get in trouble for this? So is that the reason why? We're not really sure. 1834, concatenation. That's the first word Dave puts on a jar. Concatenation. It means to be chained or to be linked. That is the word, concatenation. We believe Dave made about 80,000 jars in his lifetime alone. That's basically starting making them around 17 or 18 years old with Harvey Drake. Harvey Drake was a master potter himself, learning from Harvey, extrapolating to, let's just say 1865, even though we do believe Dave continued to work for Mr. Miles for a few years after that, or at least was a foreman showing other potters how to correctly read the kiln. 80,000 jars by himself. A good potter says they can make about, I think they believe they said about 10 a day, 10 jars a day, extrapolating pretty much every day of the year. I'm not saying by any means Dave worked every day of the year making jars, but if you just kind of do that math, 365 times 8 times 20, 45, 47 years, you kind of get a number in there. Now, 80,000 jars he made. Again, he did not write on every one of these jars. And out of these 80,000 jars, we're going to be lucky if half of those actually made it out of the kiln. This was a process by which a lot of times this stuff exploded in the kiln. I mean, you had to know exactly what you're doing. I'm not saying Dave didn't know what he's doing. The potters today will tell you that, if a temperature drop overnight when that kiln's being fired causes that stuff to explode, there's a thin spot, that, maybe a problem with the clay somewhere causes it. So we may be lucky that after all this, 40,000 pieces came out. So to have as many as we do know that he wrote on, it's pretty extraordinary. O Moon and the Stars, hard work to make big jars. August 22nd, 1834. This is actually in the State Museum. And what I love about this piece is, I'm sorry?
That was just in the museum.
There's this jar. And what's interesting about this one, I've always loved this, and I don't know, I don't think Dave made mistakes. I really don't. But did he make a mistake? I'm not sure. What I love about this, if you look at the word moon, O moon, M-O-O-N. He put the other O on top of the other one, like the moon is rising or something. And I don't think he made that, but I think he did that on purpose. It's really neat to see him do this. O moon, O the moon, and the stars, hard work to make big jars. 1834.
How big is that jar? Oh, there.
That's a big jar. Actually, that's it right there. It's probably a 6 to 7 gallon big jar. And that's the two of them together in the State Museum. The one on the, I believe it's the one on the right, didn't have an inscription. But what you see here is just, I mean, look how perfect they are and perfectly sized they are. If you go to the Charleston Museum, disclaimer, Charleston Museum, since they wouldn't let me use any of the photos in the films I did unless they were going to charge me $500. So, but if you go to Charleston Museum, they got 2 jars in there. I believe they're 30-gallon jars. Massive jars. And they're sitting one on top of each other in a case. And one of them says, "Oh, great and noble jar." That's what he wrote on one of them. The second one, probably made either the same day or a couple days later, had to be coiled. These things were massive. 30 gallons. You couldn't pick them up by themselves, much less if you put anything in them. So, again, as I said earlier, you know, I've been speaking about Dave now for 15, 16 years, and I love speaking about Dave. I try not to, you know, create a narrative that's not true, but I like to go, you know, Dave made some of this stuff because he knew he could. He made these big jars. He's like, I'm showing him I can make this stuff. No, good way. You can't pick, you know, they didn't have forklifts back then to pick this 30-gallon jar up. They probably blew away 500 pounds. You know, you're going to have to take this thing, you have to sit it in the corner and let it do its job just sitting there. So some of these jars that Dave made, you kind of go, he knew he could make them, and he made it for that purpose. Knowing, there's another one I'll show you here in just a moment to give you an idea. This is from 1840. Now remember I said Dave, Mr. Lewis did not own Dave until 1849. 1840. Dave belongs to Mr. Miles, where the oven bakes and the pot biles. Biles, we're all from the South, we know what that means, right? Boiling on the stove. So basically the oven baking and the pots boiling is the kiln. He's referring to the kiln. But he says here, I belong to Mr. Miles. This is 1840. Well before he ever literally was owned by Mr. Miles. But by 1840, he'd already written that Lewis's initials on many of his jars. So again, there was some working relationship there. LM stands for, says this handle will crack. June 28, 1854. Now again, I'm going to paint a picture. Am I close? I don't know, but I'm going to paint a picture. Lewis Miles is in his, Dave is in his pottery studio. He's in his pottery shop, shed. And he's working, he's making a pot. And he puts those big handles on it that Dave is known for. And Lewis Miles comes in and he goes, Dave, I got a problem. That handle, there's a problem with that handle. Now, 1854, Dave has already been doing this for 35